So we come down to the most of Ngāti Moiahu stayed at the coast on the banks of a river called Te Ika Pārua. Te Ika Pārua. Te Ika Pārua, when it was drawn up on the maps, they changed the name to Warea River because it's closest to the community of Warea. But the original name, when our tupuna were living there, well back, we're talking in the 1820s, was Te Ika Pārua, and it was a major settlement around the coast. What happened, however, in the early 1820s, in actual fact, 1814, a rangatira by the name of Murupainga from the area of Whangarei. You know where Whangarei is? Whangarei, north of Auckland. Ngāpuhi, he brought a large group down into this area. Taranaki was renowned for weaving. Most of the area, before you look around this area and you see lots and lots of little tiny grass and lots of cows, mainly because of the rainfall means you can sustain cows and they produce lots of milk when they have lots of water. But in those times, most of these areas were swamps before they drained them out, and those swamps were chocker with flax. And our tupuna used to cultivate flax, and they stripped flax and they made things, and that's their main trading commodity in those days. And so Murupainga came down with a large contingent carrying muskets down into this area where most of the people in this area hadn't yet at that time seen muskets. And they came under the guise of trading for fine cloaks. Parawai is the name of the cloaks that we normally associated with the cloaks that they made in those days. And when he came here with his entourage, they started with a major battle at the area of where Kormene Road is. You know where Kormene Road? Which is just this side of Okato. And then they carried around and then they attacked the area of Warea. And they took many prisoners from that battle, and then they got the prisoners to strip the flax, and then they carried the flax back up north, and then they sold the flax to the traders, to the Pākehā traders, because they needed the flax to make sails, to make ropes. And the flax within the Taranaki area had one of the highest breaking strain of any fibre that was known to the British Empire of the time. So they were the traders were eager to get their hands on flax, in particular the flax that was grown in this region. And so once Murupainga came through and the word got out of the quality of the flax in this region, repeatedly tribes from the north came into this area. Now many of the people that were living in Warea, the normal practice was to retreat up to the maunga. This area was very dense bush, and so it was very hard for raiding parties to find anyone within the bush. And they had a number of pa sites up on the maunga that they used for protection. In particular, the huge pa, which is called maru. It's a large, maru is on the headwaters of the Waitotoroa. So if you carry up the headwaters there, you come to a large flat area surrounded by ravines on all sides, apart from the top, so it's almost impossible to attack, and the area is very difficult terrain. So they knew that if they moved to that area, they would be away from whatever enemies. So what happened is they had staging posts up towards New Plymouth, and as soon as they saw raiding parties, they sent word, and the people retreated inland until those raiders had gone. And that took place, that carried on for around about 21 years. 21 years of that warfare raiding from the north. And after Ngāpuhi came through, then Waikato started coming through, and repeatedly the Waikato came through to wipe out the people that were in this area. But the people of Taranaki were very resilient. They quite often refer to the people of Taranaki as tatarakihi. You know what tatarakihi is? Cicadas. Cicadas? So the concept is when it's winter time, you don't hear them. And it's like when the raiding parties come through, they retreat inland and the place appears deserted and there's no one anywhere to be seen. And then when the summer comes along, they all come out of the ground and it's a deafening roar of the sound of the cicadas. Well, in those days, they had bush that was the noise of summer. So they associated summer for when the enemy has left and winter for when the enemy comes upon the people. So for 21 years, the people of this area sustained repeated raids from the north. And they were looking for one thing. What was it that they were looking for? Harakeke, our flax, and taking it away and trading. When they traded, when they sold the flax, almost all of that money went into buying what? Guns, weapons. And so it drove the arms race here in Aotearoa. So if we go to 1834 was when peace was made between Taranaki and Waikato. And it was at that point then people started to come back and resettle the areas where they had originally been. And so your tupuna, our tupuna, settled back into the area of Warea. And when they came back, some of the people had retreated all the way through to Wellington. So those of you from Wellington and know the connections of Taranaki down into that area, so all through the late 1820s and the early 1830s, a lot of Te Atiawa and of Taranaki and Ngāti Ruanui headed south into Wellington, the top of the South Island, and they settled in those areas. What they did when they were in those areas, they learned about agriculture, the machinery of cultivation and of trade, and they brought those skills back into this area. So the area of Warea that we see, remember the little township where the road goes through, when you go through to New Plymouth, try to remember to look out for it. Pungarehu, you know where Pungarehu, the little township just out here on the road, main road, just down the road here, where you carry along, there's a big long straight. When you get to the end of the straight, you cross the Warea River, but it's also known, our tupuna knew it as what? Te Ika Pārua. Te Ika Pārua is the river of Warea. You cross over Warea and then the Ika Pārua, and that's where you get to Warea. If you look to your left towards the sea, there's these huge flat areas, these plains. All of those were covered in cultivations. Now our tupuna, yours and my tupuna, one of the things they did very well was cultivating something we don't expect to be cultivated in this region. Now they cultivated pumpkins and potatoes and all of those sorts of things, mainly because they could be stored. So you want to store your crops all through winter, you're able to feed it yourselves and to trade. So those sorts of produce, it's very easy to transport. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 weeks to get all of the produce into town. If you've got cabbages, that doesn't really work that well then. So it tended to be potatoes, kumara, taiwa or potatoes, pumpkins, anyway, corn. But the thing that our tupuna excelled at was cultivating wheat. They excelled at cultivating wheat. And as a result, they had 3 flour mills, unheard of in those times, for Māori communities to have flour mills. They had 3 major flour mills, as well as Ngā Maha Ngā Tairi, the hapu to the north of our area. And they ground the wheat. They put it into bags and they traded directly with the New Plymouth settlement. And over that period, with the many hundreds of acres, they built a huge economic base. They had numerous ploughs, numerous oxen. They tended to plough with oxen, not horses. We tend to see horses pulling ploughs. In those days, they tended to have oxen pulling their ploughs. And they grew they built a large economic base in the area of Warea. Now, in a similar way, they also developed a large economic base in Waitara, in the area of Waitara. And so those were the 2 main economic centres for Taranaki. When government came to this area and they wanted land, most of Taranaki, including your tupuna, my tupuna, Tohu Te Whiti, Titoko Waru, and many others, they made a commitment they saw the value in the land and they wanted to retain the land and to develop it all economically. They could see that by continuing to develop it in this way, they would be able to be self-sufficient in the future. And so they made a commitment not to sell any more land. They sold Ormata, they sold Bell Block, they sold New Plymouth, and they said that is sufficient. However, what happened is you've heard about the New Zealand company with the Wakefield brothers. They did a dirty and they went over to England and sold the whole of Taranaki on paper, and people turned up into New Plymouth with deeds of land, and then they found that the Wakefield brothers hadn't actually bought it. The Wakefield brothers believed that because they arrived when there weren't many Māori in the area, that it would be easy to buy this whole region. And so they went off and they sold all of this land to a whole lot of settlers. They arrived in New Plymouth, and before long, New Plymouth was swarming with settlers, but they realised that the titles of land weren't worth the paper that they were on. That then put huge pressure on the government to get the land off Taranaki. And then Taranaki, of the same mind, as I just said, saw the value in the land and they wanted to develop it economically, as they had seen from Waitara and from Warea. That put the pressure on Waitara. They also wanted Waitara River as a port, because New Plymouth at that time didn't have a breakwater, and so what they tended to do is bring their ships, waited till low tide, they grounded the ships on the sandy beach, unloaded it, and then the next high tide they put the ships out. But it does damage to the ships doing that on a repeated basis. So they wanted Waitara River to build a dock alongside because it had a deep channel to be able to bring the ships in. The only problem is that was the main centre of Te Atiawa. So that's where all of their economic base was, right there at the river mouth. And so that put the pressure on the government to buy land. Māori within the region didn't want to sell land, and it caused the conflict that built the war. The war started on the 17th of March in 1860. 1860, 17th of March. Try to remember that date. It has significance for here in Parihaka. So in 1860, on the 17th, the first shots are fired in Waitara. They already knew that there was going to be fighting, and so they had got a huge contingent of troops into New Plymouth, all ready for war, because they forced the sale, and the Māori that were living in Waitara didn't want to sell the land, so they were pushed off their land, and the land was forced sale. They had already got, the HMS Niger. You know what HMS means? Anyway, it's a ship, a man of war. It was the biggest warship that was in the southern hemisphere at the time. They had sent word to New South Wales, who also helped run New Zealand at that time, and they got the ship from New South Wales to come to New Zealand, knowing that there would be conflict in this region. Only problem is the HMS Niger arrives a day late. The fighting had already started in Waitara. When it arrived in New Plymouth, rather than sending it to Waitara, where the fighting was, they sent it south. And they sent it initially to a past site by the name of Waireka. Now, those of you who know New Plymouth, the next little township south is Ormata. You know where Ormata is? Just this side of New Plymouth. There's a past site there. There had been ongoing conflict between the people that were in Waireka and the Pākehā that was settling in the area of Ormata. So the fighting the conflict was escalating and escalating, just as it was in Waitara. So they came and they attacked the past site of Waireka, and in that past site were most of the leaders of Taranaki iwi. And so they attacked it. They brought snipers around from the back and they sniped from a higher area of land, and they killed a lot of the main rangatira, including two of the main rangatira of our hapu of Ngāti Moeahu, by the name of Parihaka, who is an uncle to your fellas tupuna of Parata Moeahu. So Parihaka was shot and killed. He's buried at Warea. And another one, Aperaha Tereke, which is my tupuna, Tai Mutuariki, was killed in that battle as well. When they were killed, that's when the people turned to Tohu Te Whiti, who were probably in their mid-30s at that time. This is in 1860. They were young at that time to be taking such a leadership role, but the key leaders of Warea had been killed. So they had these huge cultivations. Tohu Te Whiti were well versed with reading and writing and trading, and they were the main negotiators for the community with the trading that took place with New Plymouth.